we're going to go ahead and okay, we're going to do some introductions. Hi, it's your other co-presenter. So I'll model.
And
we have my
this session is being recorded on Zoom, so all the presenters and any questioners will have to speak into the mics.
Okay. So my name is Jada Hicks.
Hello, y'all.
But I'm a staff attorney at the Center for HIV Law and Policy. I use she, her pronouns. Just a little bit about how I'm connected to HIV criminalization. I head our Positive Justice Project program at CHLP. Man, I hope I stop getting so tongue-tied. Where we work throughout the nation to decriminalize HIV and other stigmatized diseases. Biani, can you please introduce yourself and pronouns, what organization you're with, and what work your organization leads?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. After spending 18 months of my life in Rikers for just defending myself from a gay crime attack. So I ended up in Rikers to the point of being deported, and thanks to organizations such as the Sex Worker Law Project and the Road. So I'm here and organizing my community. So I've been organizing my community for more than a decade. Yeah, that's me.
Okay. I'm LaShonda Salinas, and I am a Tennessee advocate for Health Not Prisons Collective and the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation Council of Justice Leaders, and PWN, and my pronouns are she, her, and Black Queen.
My name is Tiffany Moore. Pronouns are she, her. Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm with the Tennessee HIV Modernization Coalition and the Elizabeth Taylor Foundation Council of Justice Leaders. And I'm in this work because I have been criminalized in Tennessee under sex work, aggravated prostitution, and I spent 20 years of my life on the sex offender registry.
One thing is, I got into this work because in 2006, 2007, I was criminalized for criminal exposure to HIV. And I have to register on the sex offender registry.
Okay, I'm just going to hop into everything while I'm logging in. Okay, sorry, I want to make sure that it's me logging in. I wanted to give like a brief setting the stage. I feel like most of you have probably already heard this before, but like what is HIV criminalization? Does anyone not know what HIV criminalization is? Can I skip this portion? Since we're short on time, I'm gonna just get into it. So when we're talking about criminalization, I'm sorry, I forgot about the microphone, thank you. Oh my gosh, slides. This is exciting, okay. So criminal laws targeting people living with HIV for conduct that is legal for individuals who have not been diagnosed with HIV. This is all information that we went over at the plenary session. Because I want y'all to focus more on the stories that you're going to hear today, I'm going to just, it's going to be up here. If you would like slides, just reach out to me, please. How does HIV criminalization tie in with our conversation today that we are having? So we're going to be talking about criminal records and how a criminal record can affect your everyday, day-to-day life. So it will limit access to employment, education, housing, your ability to be involved civically. Let's remind ourselves voting is huge. You might not be able to vote. Access to public assistance programs, and for our trans community, even the ability to, sorry, my last speaker is trying to join, ability to change their name. So in certain states, not every state, convictions, certain convictions will make it so that you're not allowed to change your name. So for a trans individual, they won't be able to change their name, and so that it better goes with how they identify. Nearly 9 in 10 employers, 4 in 5 landlords, and 3 in 5 colleges use background checks to screen for an applicant's criminal record. You sure can. Hi, Eddie. Can we pause and have Edward introduce himself? Just since you joined a little late, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself. Pronouns, if you're within an organization, please name that organization and how you're connected to HIV criminalization or what work you engage in.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Sweet. My name is Edward Castro, and I was born with HIV, but I am not affiliated with any organization, but I have worked with a few.
And what are your pronouns?
He and him.
Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to hop back into it because I want to give Biani enough time to present and get to class. And one study found that more than 45,000 federal and state statutes and regulations impose disqualifications or disadvantages on individuals living with convictions. So I think this is just kind of setting the stage for all of the language that we're going to talk about quickly. I just wanted to give a background for what barriers are created by a criminal record. So what the hell is an expungement? An expungement is actually the process of getting an expungement. So these words are interchangeable. You might have been more familiar with the word expungement. So to expunge is to erase or remove completely. I want to point out that it does not mean that you are forgiven for a crime. That's something that goes with pardon. So please don't think of this in terms of, I hate that framework anyway, but don't think of it in terms of like you're being forgiven for a crime. It just means that it's completely removed from your record. In law, expungement is the process by which a record of a criminal conviction is destroyed or sealed from an individual's criminal record. Without additional legal action, the court can expunge such things as like news stories, social media posts, interviews, or in some cases, reports made by police. So I think it's important to point that out as well. So if there was news coverage, for example, in my home state, they have something called mugshots.com in North Carolina. So for every arrest, it also used to be published as a paper. I don't know if it still is, but it was a paper in the gas stations every week. And they would publish it and it would have everyone's mugshot and what they were convicted of. So things like that, when you get an expungement, they're never going to be able to, without additional legal action, get rid of like those types of stories. Or if you were in the news and they wrote a news story about your crime, alleged crime, they're not going to be able to get rid of that either. So an expungement order directs the court to treat the criminal conviction as if it never occurred, removing it from your criminal record as well as ideally from the public record as much as possible. So keep in mind those scenarios that I just mentioned as a caveat. Some states also allow partial expungement. So this is really when we're talking about a plea deal. So when one or more charges are arising from the same incident, so it has to be the same incident, some will result in a conviction and others are going to be dismissed or held as a non-conviction. That means your case is going to be eligible for partial expungement. So partial expungement applies to the non-conviction related charges. They can, and they would be expunged, but the ones that you were convicted for wouldn't. Again, certain states allow this and certain states do not. Expungement is a very state-specific process. So while I am giving you a very broad overview, know that each state is going to have a different process that you have to go through, and it can actually be different from county to county. They have what are called local court rules. So county to county, what the DA expects from you in order to get an expungement can differ. That's how complex of a patchwork that we're talking about when we're talking about expungement. In most cases, when your offense was expunged, it should not show up on a basic background check. So this includes applying for jobs, filling out a rental application, applying for a mortgage, something even like signing up for Uber or Lyft as a driver, volunteering for church or community. And they should not be available for anyone to search. So that's the benefits of having an expungement. The process, I touched on this a little bit. Sorry, I don't know what happened with this slide. Each state will have a different process. Each state has its own laws about whose records are eligible for expungement and what crimes/offenses may be expunged, the procedures for applications, and the definition of how records will be managed under an expungement order. So there are certain crimes where you cannot, in some states, even a petition for an expungement. So that's why it's so important to know your local rules. The rules are typically prescribed by statute, and they fall into 3 buckets: automatic relief, mandatory relief upon request, and discretionary, meaning the court can decide whether or not to grant you that relief. This is a map that outlines, and it's from the Restoration of Rights Project. It just shows you what states allow for broader felony and misdemeanor relief, limited felony and misdemeanor relief, pardon and misdemeanor felonies, and then just misdemeanor relief or no relief whatsoever. New Hampshire did a case I used as a case study. They did marijuana convictions, low-level convictions that can be expunged. You'll see here that the language is talking about to annul the arrest record that I've highlighted. That means to expunge. Illinois, we're talking about motion to vacate and expunge, meaning that it is going to be mandatory upon petition. So this is an example of that. Sealing records. In some states, sealing records is the same thing as an expungement. In other states, a completely different process. So it depends again on your state. When a record is sealed, it's made confidential, not readily available to the public, meaning it will not show up in background checks. And just like the process and criteria for sealing a record, for expungements, how and when a record can be sealed depends on particular jurisdiction laws. The general public, landlords, schools, and most employers are not going to see your sealed records. However, for law enforcement purposes, sometimes immigration, gun ownership, excuse me, other court cases, admission to be a lawyer, any sort of federal check. So if like you want to work in a hospital or something like that, that would be a federal check as well. Removal. Removal language is when we are allowed for removal or petition from the sex offender registry. Whether an individual qualifies for removal, I have this so many times in my presentation, it's going to vary from state to state, and the requirements are going to be based on a state statute. Removal criteria, this is a really broad list. Please know, again, you would have to look at your state, but length of time on the registry, victim impact statements, evidence of rehabilitation, risk assessment by a sex offender evaluation treatment provider, and whether you have new charges or convictions. We're going to talk about Tennessee's removal language later on in the presentation, why it is so important to have removal language, and what we're going to, Edward's case is going to kind of highlight for us, is that if we change the law with our reform efforts, so for instance, we changed the law in Washington, we made it so that it was no longer required to register as a sex offender if you had a conviction going forward. We never addressed what happened to individuals that were already required to register or had already made a conviction under their statute. So that was a piece that was not worked in. And so when we get to him, he'll talk a little bit more about trying to navigate that process by himself. But that is why it's so important to incorporate either expungement, sealing language, or removal language into reform efforts from the very beginning, so that you don't have to go back and do it, and that you don't leave people behind and struggling to try and navigate the process by themselves. So I'm going to pass it to Biani. She is going to talk about the process in New York for the Walking While Trans bill and how they incorporated sealing language there. So Biani, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Sorry, can you do me a favor? Can you move the bottle of water that is in front of
Yes. I'm so sorry.
that is there because I can't see that person that is over there. So as I said, my name is Gene Garcia, and I'm a community organizer here in Metro New York for about 11 years. Also, as I mentioned, I immigrated to the United States when I was 16. Now my English is getting better, and I'm trying to go to a YDR and learn a little bit more too, so I can express myself and to be like, heard, and being sharing why it's important to express themselves as a transgender person. So part of my story, I immigrated to the United States. My first job was doing dishwasher. I started as a dishwasher in a restaurant, and then 2 years later, I tried to start my transition. And after 6 months being in taking hormones, the owner of the restaurant told me there is no more job for you. So I say, okay. I was sad that happened, and I created my resume, my cover letter. I went to other places to find a job, but because my face, body, and everything was changing due to the hormones, I couldn't find any job. So my trans sister, who was older than me, told me, you know what? You have to do sex work. If there is no more opportunities for you, you have to do sex work. So I ended up doing sex work. I didn't pay anyone to tell me how to do sex work. I just found out this transgender person who really told me how to do sex work, how to manage clients, how to charge and everything, how to protect myself and everything, right? So after 2 years doing sex work, I was arrested. One night in October, it was a cold night in October 2009, when my friend and I were, standing in a corner, and then a person, he was drunk and started saying homophobic slurs and transphobic slurs, and then he started beating my friend. So I defend myself, my friend from him, and for that reason, I ended up in Rikers for 18 months. It was hard being in Rikers, but I was trying to do my best to continue being strong, being in jail. Because believe me, being trans, being a person of color, not speaking the language, it was hard. But thanks God, thanks to organizations as Make the Road and the Sex for Law Project helped me on my case, and that's why I'm here today. So I started working at Make the Road first. In years of organizing, we decided to, as a coalition, the CRIM New York, to start working on the Walking While Trans ban. So the Walking While Trans ban criminalized our community for more than 45 years, especially transgender people of color, like Black and brown communities. They just, if you are trans and you're walking on the street, just expressing yourself, the police can arrest you just for walking outside. And then can be in the day, it can be in the night. Just for being trans, the police arrest you. So many of my sisters or trans sisters that I grew up with them, and we also do our transition together, they are no longer in the United States because they were arrested, they were deported, and now they are in Mexico. Sadly, one of my best friends died 2 years after she was deported. And this is a reality that is still happening in our communities, especially for transgender people who are seeking asylum right now. It's really hard to find a job, so they have to go through the process of doing sex work, even though I know many people that doesn't want to continue doing sex work, but because there is no opportunities for trans people, they end up doing sex work. And sharing our experiences, sharing doing lobby visits for many years to repeal the walking while trans. I remember my community members sharing their experience how like one in particular, Maida Colon, she's an old transgender person. She was sharing also that she was afraid of walking down the street in the nighttime, and she always has to carry her marriage certificate to prove that the person walking next to her is her husband. So is that okay to do that? No, because straight people doesn't carry their marriage certificate to prove that the person walking next to them are their husbands. So transgender people has to do that. So that was a strong story that Senator Catalina Cruz and Assemblymember Catalina Cruz and Jessica Ramos always share that experience on avenues. So that was a strong argument to repeal the walking while trans that criminalized our community for many years. Especially like, I remember one time I was 17, almost 17, 18. I was walking with my boyfriend in the nighttime. He was holding my hand. And then from nowhere, a policeman just stopped us and started asking questions. What are you doing? What are you dressing sexy? So they just assumed that I was doing sex work. They pushed me face to the wall. They searched my bag. They found 2 condoms, which was that was in 2013, I think. And it was hard. It was my first arrest. No, sorry, that was in 2007. And it was the first time I dressed as a trans, dressing sexy and wearing women's clothing. And I ended up arrested the first day. So it was hard for me. I was scared because at that time I was undocumented, 16 years old. I don't know what to do. And even though my boyfriend tried to speak to the person that was arresting me, and they told him, you have to go or I'm gonna arrest you too. So I ended up arrested that day. But especially when we talk about the walking while trans, our community really, really organized themselves to repeal this bill, because really was like our community was suffering from discrimination, police harassment, especially the police harassment that they always said, you have to do me an oral sex or I'm gonna arrest you. And that's always happening. I remember once I was walking down the street and one police officer told me, Garcia, you have to go home. They already know my last name, even though it was the first time that they arrested me. But it was sad to see that, and also like super respectful from to our communities, to someone to know your information and know what you're doing, or even though like trying to survive, right? But right now we are working on the Stop the Violence in the Sex Trade, which it's gonna decriminalize the selling and purchasing between sex between adults, and also talking about expungement. There is a lot of people with a lot of like arrests. Some our people of my community have like 10 arrests, 11 arrests for just walking on down the street or just like doing survival sex work. And for some of them are human trafficking survivors, and due to those arrests, they can fix their immigration status. And it's hard to writing letter to say this person needs to be to continue being in the United States and to fix their immigration status. And it's too hard to see our community go through that. It's some of the work that we're doing right now to repeal, really repeal the or to decriminalize sex work, because there is many people that want to continue doing sex work. There is a lot of people that doesn't want to continue to doing sex work, and for those people who doesn't want to continue sex work, we're trying to to try new form of employment for them and opportunities for our communities. And especially for transgender people who do survival sex work, some of us are kicked out of the house early in, 12, 13 or 16 years, and there is no other way to survive just doing sex work, because I do that. And it's important to also continue speaking about this, not only the decriminalization of sex work, but also the HIV. How an HIV or an STI can be a reason to be arrested and to end up in jail. That's most of the work that we do, especially sharing our experiences in Albany. And it's important to humanize, especially sex work and sex workers, because believe me, I work with too many sex workers that I know most of them, especially from their own experiences. I remember all of them as their stories that they told me, and they live in my heart, in my brain, and in our communities too, because we are part of the community. And this is why we need to repeal the decriminalize sex work and humanize sex workers too. That's all what I want to say.
Thank you, Vianney. I feel like you shared some really powerful stories in a short amount of time. I know that you have to get ready for class, so I wanted to see if people had questions specifically for Vianney before she heads out.
I don't have any questions for you. I just want to say thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. I myself had never heard some of those stories regarding the Walking While Trans bill, so thank you for educating me. I'll be also in touch via email, so thank you. Please enjoy class. I am going to pass it off to Tiffany now to tell her story, and
Okay.
questions and answers after that will be after all of the speaking.
Okay. So hello, Tiffany Moore again. So my story is Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been HIV positive now for 23 years. I was 15 when crack cocaine and trafficking all got intersected with me. So I was trafficked and also shown, which now I'm seeing there's a thing of chemsex. So I was very youngly taught a mixture of two worlds, and I was pulled in. So of course that life starts as a high life. It starts as fun. You think you're being rebellious. I didn't have a really good solid foundation home. I came from being held in mental institutions all my life. And one of the things I learned early on, I was always strapped to in straitjackets, and I was shot up with drugs to be put to sleep. So I feel addiction in a way was taught without me knowing at a very young age. And so when I took a hit of crack, that was the missing piece. So everything just kind of flown off at that age. So fast forward a little bit, between the age 15 and about 19, I got away from my trafficker. And that was actually, that was the time that I was raped as well. And I was infected with HIV from the John. And there I was on the streets, and that flipped to survival sex work. So here I was trapped with addiction and trapped with this is a life, and I built a community, because you build a community when you're out there on the streets. It becomes your family, it becomes necessary. So I had built that, and then hit with HIV. So one of the things in Tennessee is when you're prostituting, when you're a sex worker, one of the first things if you're charged with prostitution, it's mandatory to take an HIV test. They do that at the jail, whether the health department has to come to you, pull you out of your cell, they're getting your blood. I did it innocently. I didn't think anything of it really. I had remembered that rape, but of course, within that time frame, it's really not something you're facing in reality. You hear a lot of things when you get in vehicles, a lot of threats, harm comes our way, but that test came back positive. I found out by not only them reading it out in the courtroom, So I went to court and my status was read, and we're talking about a full courtroom where everyone's in there for all their other charges. You got all the other, inmates over on the side. You've got families, the entire community. So not only did I find out that way, but the health department was chasing me down as well in the streets and leaving flyers on random doors with my name. So that was, I wasn't in denial, but that was definitely, it did not help. It did not help the healing or me wanting to walk in and figure out what was going on. And then it kicked off an immediate surveillance. So I had a nemesis officer out there who immediately found out and was eager and arrested me immediately again. And then I was warned. So when you get that prostitution charge, back up a little bit, you're warned in court. You get one warning that if you catch another conviction, it's going to be aggravated, a felony. And I remember being told that about the sex offender registry. I remember my public defender saying that to me. Back up to 95 when I had everything happen and I was just 15, the registry had not been created yet. So in the midst of my addiction, this registry in the United States was built. I had no idea what that meant. I did not know this was a public registry. I didn't know what the restrictions were going to tell. And really, I was so far gone in addiction and mental health, I didn't comprehend. That was ineffective counsel because I was not mentally competent to understand at that time. So I was released, and of course the surveillance. So the officer had gotten wind of that, and I was immediately picked back up again on my first aggravated. So I was barely 20, 21. I don't even think I could buy liquor yet. And I was charged with aggravated prostitution, and I was put in sex offender registration. I was immediately sent to prison. You don't get probation for that. So I was such a baby, and I went to TPW for 4 years. My first sentence was 4 years. You do not get parole. You do not make parole on sex offenses. So it was an automatic flatten. So it took 2 years and 9 months with no write-ups to flatten my sentence. And I mean, I realized I wanted help. There was a battle going on, so I tried to reach out. But now, not only the whammy of being HIV positive, and at that time, the stigma of living with HIV, halfway houses were basically like, you're not equipped to work, we're not a medical facility, but now the registry. So no places was accepting anybody that I was on the sex offender registration. So basically, I flattened my sentence and I went right back to the community that I knew I could go back to. So it ended up being a cycle through the years. I ended up getting picked up. I had 4 aggravated prostitutions in total. And in 2009, I believe my third, I was in Memphis. I had a major breakdown. I just couldn't continue to take it. I wanted, this was going to continue to be a cycle. Either I was going to spend life in prison or I was going to die. So I reached out to Madeline, and they were the first program, and they took me in immediately. And the sad thing is the court systems always knew about this program through all these years. They always knew that this program existed, and yet nobody ever attempted or tried to reach out to help. They're eager to write newspaper stories and blast me all over the local newspaper, but nobody. I made one phone. I was able to find this program, like fairly quick. And once I did, I went. I left and I went to this program and I got clean. I got the resources, and that's where my advocacy started. I got pregnant with my daughter, and I realized that the clarity was setting in that this registry, like, this isn't right. I'm not a pedophile. Because in Tennessee, there's no tier systems. When you're placed on the sex offender registration, you're automatically considered a child pedophile. So I couldn't go to amusement parks, housing. I couldn't get a job within 1,000 feet, and nothing was making logical sense. I was not a danger. I was not a danger to anybody. So I reached out. I sent an email to Sean Strube, and because of him, he connected me into where I am today, and that kicked off the voice of aggravated prostitution in Tennessee, which led to the amendment to where in 2015 we're able to now petition to come off of the registry. It really wasn't it's really not a win. We're able now to come off the registry, but what happened is our original language was not meant to be specific to the bill language now is written. You have to be a survivor of trafficking, domestic violence, or rape to come off of the registry, and it's quite a process, and it's very attacking. And It almost just makes sex workers look like that's all we deal with. But that's, yeah.
Can you
I
tell
know
us
you
a
had a
little
question.
bit about what was the process to get off of
Yeah.
like, what that was like for you, how your life was affected after you were able to come off? If you could just briefly talk about that for us.
So it's Senate Bill 754, I believe, and what that process looks like is we have to petition the court. First of all, you have to be able to show sex trafficking survivor, rape, or domestic violence. And for me, how it's written, if you have any priors on that date of when that bill was passed, 2015, if you have priors, you have to go through and petition the court. And mind you, petitioning the court is not free. It's not an easy access just to walk into and get a petition before a judge. So you have to find legal reps. You have to get that document typed up. You have to go before the judge. And your first time, you're denied. So you're denied and you cannot petition for 3 years. So I had to go through that initial process of getting denied. You have to get a denial on record. It don't matter if you wait 15 years and realize, oh man, there's a bill here for me I can get. If you don't have that 3-year denial start date, you have to wait it. So we had to start that time. And then in the process of that, I'm moving back to Knoxville. And then I have to find another attorney because now the petition starts. Now in 3 years, I'm going to be eligible to refile. But then as the language continues, the district attorney can call to witness your traffickers, your rapists, and domestic violence. So it can turn into a trial. They can not automatically just sign off on it. There's an option for the district attorney to, if he finds and warrants cause, that they can just sign and move it along. But there is a 50-50 chance that a court can say, no, we're gonna fight this. Lucky for me, I had a very calculating attorney who did phenomenal work because I was out of 2 counties, Nashville and Knoxville. And I did not literally, it just ended up being a judge's signature, and neither district attorney called into question. But that's for me. That's my privilege. That's what my face and my story. That's not going to be necessarily everybody's. So, that's my worst nightmare of happening. So December 17th of 2021, the final court, Knox County, I got that signature. And after 20 years of being on the registry, overnight, I was released. And overnight, I was able to take that letter to my daughter's school, walk into her. Nothing, I'm grateful, but nothing is making sense because overnight, I'm now not a pedophile. Overnight, now I can walk in my daughter's school. Overnight, now I can go to the park. Part of the registry, you can't even attend church. You have to get a letter from the pastor of the church stating that they know you're on the sex offender registry and you're allowed to attend the church because of Sunday schools. So overnight, everything just goes away. So it's still, for me, that process and that realization of how much they robbed and what all this took is still balancing in. But the process sounds easy, but it takes money. So for me, I had an organization that I now work for that covered my legal fees. The lawyer did not do it pro bono. And it was a lot of work. I'm talking, it was on top of, he had to go back and he had to be ready to fight for me. And it's a pretty difficult subject for any lawyer to get in front of and had to be prepared. And so that's the battle. That's the downfall of this language and the current law that we have. It's not accessible. This law has been on the books since 2015, and I'm the first woman in Tennessee, first individual that has accessed it. And we've got 127 on the registry for aggravated. So that's where my heart's heavy at. Yeah.
So I want to thank you for sharing your story because that's actually the first time I've heard your story, Tiffany, in full.
Well, that's like a.
We don't
have that much time.
It's so hard on this 15-minute full version. But it's the first time I've heard you go a little bit more in depth about your story. And I think what it highlights is why it's so important, really, to include this language. It's not something that advocates often think about. And if you haven't experienced it yourself, it's not going to be at the forefront forefront. I think we do often think of some forgotten populations, right? Like sex work is a very popular topic right now. We're always talking about not leaving sex workers behind in our movement. We don't really talk about not leaving behind people that are on the sex offender registry, if they're there for sex work or not. It's just not something that's at the forefront of our movement. And I think it should be. There aren't a ton of states that require sex offender registry, but in the it's affecting a lot of lives. And so I want to turn it over to Edward. I will say that CHLP was actively involved in the reform efforts in Washington. And I think Washington is what made me think to even submit this HINEC abstract, because I learned from Washington. I feel like us, the advocates, and all the other organizations really messed up by not including removal language. So anyone that is convicted in Washington state today will not be required to register. And that's a huge win. But I want Edward to talk about what it's like having been convicted prior to the legal reform and without having any sort of removal language there for him to get off of the registry. So Edward, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you guys for being here today. Just going to jump right into it. Telling one story isn't easy. It's hard to push the words out. It's even hard to put them in order for people to understand exactly what you're saying or how you feel. It's hard because someone is going to hear, they're going to read it, maybe even tell someone else about it and give their opinions. But here we are. Most beautiful thing is the most beautiful thing is how each one of us experiences life. Not just a select few because theirs is better, but all of us. It's what tells us apart. It's what shapes us. It's what lights a fire under our ass, or what makes us cry uncontrollably. Well, this is me opening up to the lot of you, and maybe for the first time, and maybe the second time you're hearing this story. This is a story about my history that still holds value and meaning to this day. Everything I hate and love about myself. I have felt a lot of shame as I grew up. I was born to a mother who couldn't take care of me, so my brother and sister and I went into the foster care system when I was 3. We ended up getting adopted when I turned 6. The day after my birthday in '97, we moved to Freeman, Washington, to a farm about 25 minutes outside of Spokane. At first, we were very, very excited about living in a farm. Not only were we able to call someone mom or dad, but there was also animals: ducks, geese, horses, cows, pigs, chickens. At one point, we had a saltwater fish tank, 90 gallons. Got to learn how that all worked out. So we did have a lot of good times. But as I grew up, I found my new home came with a lot of problems. You can only imagine trying to run a house of 15 kids and you're the middle child to an even bigger family. I went from having a mother who couldn't take care of me to a mother who showed no interest in me. There were a lot of chores, and I remember vividly how she would yell at us as she sat at the computer with her eyes glued to the screen while we worked, while we cleaned the kitchen, did dishes, did laundry. I figured out what a period was at the age of 11. Birthdays also sucked. You could tell who she liked more based on what she gave each kid. At the age of 11, I learned about HIV in school and about a boy named Ryan White. And for some reason, I was super curious. I had been taking medication my whole life up to this point, and I didn't know why. So I went home and asked my mother if I had it. And at this point, I was thinking about the fact that since I could remember it, I had been taking medication all my life. I didn't know. But she said I didn't have it. Then not even 5 seconds go by before she says to me, "Do you remember that question you asked?" And of course I did. I knew exactly what question she was talking about. And she said, "Well, you do. You were born with it."
I remember putting me in the van to go pick up a bike. It was a Blue Mountain bike. I loved it and I hated it. Bye. It's good meeting you, Biani.
Bye, Biani. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Sorry for interrupting. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Bye-bye.
So I got a bike. It was a Blue Mountain bike. I loved it and I hated it. It wasn't because she loved me, but because she felt sorry for me that she bought me this present. To me, I guess it felt like a Band-Aid, as if it was her saying, well, I can't fix these emotions that you're having right now, so I'm going to give you something to distract you. I was scared, I was confused, I needed some explanation or some reassurance about what was going to happen to me. That feeling of excitement about a new bike was gone just like that. I no longer cared about the object. I no longer wanted the bike. I could ever please my mom again. But that was the moment that I will never forget. It's still, I remember that bike like it was yesterday. So now I was living in Bremen, Washington, a very white farm community with our white adopted parents, going to the worst school imaginable for young Black kids. I was already dealing with insecurities about being different at school, and now I was even more different. Now I know that I was HIV positive. I am HIV positive. At the age of 14, I went back into the foster care system. I decided to emancipate myself and just live outside of the home. Our adopted mom couldn't parent us. I went to 3 different high schools, 6 different foster homes. Despite the chaos and unpredictability of my life, I still graduated. Not at the top of my class, but I graduated. The support I couldn't find at any of my foster homes, I found in school and in church. I was never a troublemaker, and my teachers, friends, and even my friends' parents were kind and supportive. At one point in my high school years, I became a youth group leader that people looked up to. I was looked at as someone who didn't have HIV. I was normal in the eyes of society. Even became prom prince my senior year. I was actually really surprised about this because I didn't really have a lot of friends. I talked to everybody, so it was very interesting moment to walk up there as I'm shaking, leg shaking, and not being able to stand straight, getting this satchel over my shoulder while everyone's staring at me. It was a great moment. Just like that bike, these are moments that I'll never forget. That bike had said one thing about what society says about me. It was like, oh, we're just going to brush it over the rug. But then I also had this satchel of like, okay, you've made it to the top of your class, so to speak. So it's very interesting, different levels of how people saw me. After graduation, I enrolled in a community college in Spokane. It was a tough time in some ways because I was out in the foster care system and on my own financially with no help with rent or expenses. So I worked, I earned my way. I got an HIV case manager around that time who I bonded with, who looked out for me as much as she could. I was in regular medical care, health, and taking my meds. When I was 19, I had a girlfriend and she knew about my HIV positive, but we were dumb kids. We had dumb kid ideas. We had a 3-way. We drank 4 Logos, and it was an interesting time. After we broke up, she ended up telling her dad about this. Later, she said she was sorry and didn't know all this would happen. At sentencing, the judge said something about how this girl would live the rest of her life, fear that tests would come positive someday. This is 2023 and no one has contacted HIV from me. When I was sentenced to prison, the courtroom was full. My pastor and almost my entire youth group came to support me. My life was thrown into a cell because of not disclosing my HIV status to the other girl. There were no transmissions of HIV. I was 19 years old and I had never been in juvenile detention or had any trouble with cops. Believe it or not, I never even got that talk of what to do when a cop pulls you over. and that comes with living with white parents in the middle of a country. I felt I was a good kid who had just been through a lot. I didn't know what a lot was until I went to prison. I got pushed into this terrible depression and fear, into a life I never thought I would see myself in. Not only am I HIV positive, but I'm a felon and now I have to register. I've been made out to be this monster. The headline news in the local newspaper painted it this way. This evil person, this black man is out there trying to infect people, not knowing who I am. The system has labeled me the villain, the person who doesn't get to succeed. After prison, it was really, really rough. I looked for work every day, but the sex offender status shot down most of the jobs I applied for. I thought the best thing I could do was go back to the community college and get a degree. I thought if I had a degree, a miracle could happen. Someone might look past my record and offer me a job. One thing that would happen sometimes is that if there were any kids under 18 in the classrooms, I would have to automatically dismiss or drop out, have to wait until next quarter to be able to try to take that class again. I returned to church community that had offered me a lot of support as a teen, but it was awkward. I couldn't attend certain services where young children were present. I was asked to sit in the back because of the rules about sex offenders. It made me feel terrible about myself. I used to be a youth leader, and now I was banned to the back of the church like, you don't belong here. Didn't get a real job until 2015 when I started doing construction for $13 an hour because that's all I could get. While in college, I took an intro to communications class. The teacher owned this dinner theater place. Before I asked to audition for the dinner theater, I had this flashback, a memory of the day my brother and sister got taken away. My little old self watching Michael Jackson movies, singing how real it was, but I later learned out it was just a style of art called acting. So after class one day, I asked to audition for this play that they wrote, an adaptation of The Love of Vinnie Valentine, and I got a part of the detective. My first acting gig. I felt honored, but man, did I suck. It was really, really bad. My experience during that show made me change my major and take acting classes at Spokane Falls Community College, which was the best decision I ever made. I was able to be someone else. I could be on stage and not have people see me, but the character I was trying to portray. When I was on stage, I felt like it was okay to express feelings and have people accept them. Even got an agent in Seattle, in Spokane first, and I was starting to get a little work in here and there, but I was dismissed from the agency when my sex offender status was discovered. I actually told them straight up, and a week later, I got an email saying that I'd been dropped by them and that I could no longer contact them. They felt really bad about it, but they couldn't keep me. It doesn't matter what the story of your life is. No one reads the small print and they see is this person a registry sex offender. So it doesn't matter where you've been through or whatever. You can, be the best person in the world, but if you have that status on your resume or your paperwork, then you're automatically disregarded. I'm so used to holding back and keeping my life a secret. But I love it when people open up to me. I love it. I like it when people are authentic. I love knowing someone is opening up to you and you can accept them. However, I've always felt that I'm not accepted when I do open up about who I am and my experiences. I've learned that it's okay that I have all these feelings and I've gone through so much. I'm choosing to not let my past break me. The common thing we have as humans is that we are humans. The uncommon thing is that we are all different. It's up to you on how you want to use what you've been through and what you want to bring to the world. I want to tell you a compelling story and change lives. I want the world to know I've learned a lot by watching people and watching stories. We need stories that let us know it's okay to be us, that we are worthy, that everything is going to be okay. An uncommon thing can be common and seen as beautiful, loved, and wanted. Thank you.
Edward, we're just over here whispering about how amazing you are.
Yes.
You are an unbelievable public speaker, and your story is so inspiring.
Thank you.
I know, I'm really trying not to cry. I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about whether you've tried to get removed from the registry, and if so, just what that has been like. How did you find an attorney? Was it pro bono? So if you could just kind of elaborate a little bit on that as well.
So back in 2012, when I got out, I got accepted to go to Washington, D.C. to speak for the Zero Project on decriminalizing HIV. So I got to speak in front of the presidential committee. And that was like the last time I really talked to them until I want to say 2019. Lauren Fanning hit me up and said that they were about to change the laws for the HIV and decriminalizing it. And so at that moment, she got me contacted with the Zero Project, and I contacted this guy named, I think it was Stephen Bryan or Brandon or something like that. I can't remember.
I think it's Bryson.
I started doing some work with him. Then I found out that he got a new job, and the people at the nonprofit didn't contact me to still continue the work on it. And I just found this out a couple weeks ago. So now I'm trying to figure it out. But at the same time, why would I want to just get my name taken off the registry, to petition the court to do that, when I would rather have it expunged versus for, all the other things that you said earlier. But that is kind of where I'm at in the process right now.
And just FYI, I tracked down that nonprofit and got their card while I was here. So if you want to be back in touch with them, we can be. We'll follow up about that online. That is why conferences like HINAC are so important. I didn't realize when I started speaking to Edward a few weeks ago that Steve was the attorney who's also here, that he was the attorney that had worked with it, nor the organization that worked with him, that they had been connected. So I really appreciate being in a space like HINAC because I'm able to make those connections and get Edward looped back into restarting that process. So we will be in touch. I just wanted to share that I tracked them down today. And I made sure to ask for the executive director's email and phone number. So we have that. For our last speaker, I'm going to have LaShonda, who is also from Tennessee. By way of explanation, Tennessee on May 17th of this year passed a law that no longer requires people convicted of what they call HIV criminal exposure. It's no longer classified as a violent sex offense, which means you are no longer required to register as a sex offender. In that same bill, they outlined that individuals who had prior convictions could petition the TBI, which is the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, to get removed from the registry. I'm going to have LaShonda just tell her story and talk a little bit about what that process is like for her as well.
I'll be very brief.
Don't be brief.
Okay. In 2006, I was arrested for criminal exposure to HIV. My ex-partner claimed that I did not tell him that I was HIV positive. In the beginning of our relationship, I made sure that everything that I told him I was positive. I remember being at work and an officer walked through the door. I finished my customer and asked the officer, "How may I help you?" He says, "I'm looking for LaShonda Salinas. Are you her?" I told him that I was, and he proceeds to tell me my ex-partner has said that I did not tell him that I was HIV positive. At the time, my father was in the hospital dying of brain cancer. I had a 2-minute phone conversation with my mother, telling her that I was going to jail because my ex said that I did not tell him I was positive. I arrived at the jail and was booked and processed and put into what I call a big black cage like a dog kennel. After After a while, an officer got me and told me that I was going to see the night judge for my bond and if I could get out. The judge told me that I was charged with criminal exposure to HIV and my bond was set at $100,000. 10% of that would have been $10,000. How could I call my mom, who was dying in the hospital with my father, and ask her to get the family together to see if they could get up the bond money to get me out of jail? That should be the last thing on my mother's mind, so I didn't call. About a week or so after I was there, the public defender came to me and told me that she was going to try and get me a bond reduction hearing. The day came for me to go, and I'm thinking everything is going to go good because I really don't have a criminal history. Well, that is not what happened. The DA said that I was a flight risk because I had family in Nashville, Chattanooga, and Knoxville, and I could run there if I was released. So the judge ruled in the favor of the DA, and I was sent back to jail to bawl my eyes out. A week later, my public defender gave me 2 pleas, which are the following: 3 years in a woman's prison, a year and a half in prison, and a year and a half on probation. I turned those pleas down. I remember waking up one morning to call my mother and my sister to check on my father and see how he was doing. When I called, I noticed that my sister didn't sound like herself. So I asked her how was Dad and what was the doctor saying. And she told me, Tootie, because that's what the nickname they gave me. She says, Tootie, I'm sorry to tell you, but your father passed away this morning. I'm sorry. At that time, I broke down. My heart broke at that very moment. Here I am in jail, and I cannot even see my father. I'm supposed to be mourning with my family and helping them get through this process. But instead, they're helping me get through this process so I can get to his funeral. On May 26, 2007, I had to go to breakfast, and I did like I normally do. And at the time they called for everyone to go to court. They called my name, and everyone was excited and telling me that my furlough was granted and that I could go to my father's funeral. So I get ready and go to court. I sat there till about 2 to 3 p.m. that afternoon. I finally get to see my public defender, and she tells me that my furlough was granted, but there is another offer. She tells me that they're offering me 3 years probation. I ask her when would I be able to go home because I just want to be with my family and they need me right now. She said you'll be able to go home as soon as you get back and they finish your paperwork. So without hesitation, I accepted that plea. So before I went to the judge and accepted the plea, there was one major thing the judge forgot to tell me. And that was once I accepted this plea, I would have to register as a sex offender. I had to get my probation transferred to another county that I currently live in. While I was working, I got a phone call from my new probation officer telling me that I needed to go to the main office and register as a sex offender per Tennessee Code 39-13-109. As much as it pained and hurt me to do this, because I've never done anything to a child, I had to do what I was told. At the next probation appointment, I was explained what I had to do as a sex offender. I must register every 3 months since I am considered a violent sex offender. I must pay $150 registry fee. That 100 of it goes to the local agency and 50 The 50 remaining is deposited into the general fund. What general fund? I don't know what fund that goes into, but you're still taking my money. Attend sex offender classes for 3 years that I am on probation, while I am on probation, and I have to pay for the classes, which are $30 a week. Do you know how hard it is to sit in a classroom full of men that have molested a child? Can't be within 1,000 feet of a school, daycare, park, or anywhere that there's kids. I have a cousin that went to the prom in April. Everyone was there taking pictures, but sadly I was not. I could not take any pictures because I could not be there. I cannot be around anyone that is under the age of 18. He graduated in May, and I got to see the pictures that everyone was taking. I do not have any of those pictures with me at all, and there are none of me and him. While I was on probation for those 3 years, I had to take a lie detector test every 6 months and to prove to them that I have never been around a child under the age of 18.
LaShonda, thank you. Can you also talk to us about after Senate Bill 0807 was passed, have you applied to get in the registry? Do you know how long it's going to take? Can you talk a little bit about that at all, please?
Yes, it was told to me that I needed to get in touch with the TBI. I went to their website. What I didn't know from going to their website is I could request it to come off 5 years ago because I've been on the sex offender registry for 15 years. I could apply to come off 5 years ago. But I went ahead, as soon as the bill was signed on May 17th, on the 18th, I sent an email to TBI, and I also sent a certified letter to them requesting to come off. And I do have tracking of that, which they received it on the 25th. The problem is I don't know how long the process is, and I don't know when I'll get to come off.
So 2 things before we turn it over for our Q&A. The first is that if expungements, sealing of records, or removal language don't work for someone or they're not an option, the only other relief that they can get is a pardon, which is it's very, very difficult to get a pardon. It's basically you're being forgiven for your crime. So it's not really a viable option for people. The second thing is that I want to thank all of our speakers for telling their story because it is re-traumatizing. It's painful. It's fearful. There's a lot of ways that I could describe it, but I'm very thankful to each and every one of them for being brave enough to continuously share their stories, especially in these open spaces, and to be vulnerable with us. So I want to thank you all. I'm just so appreciative because I think your stories are so powerful, and you're really doing the work. And with that, I want to turn it over to our audience to see if there are any questions that you may have. And if not, I have them. No problem.
Everyone, Joe, one speaker. But I heard LaShonda and Tiffany's story 2 times, and every time I hear them, I'm in tears. And thank you, Edward, for sharing. And I don't want to miss
Beyond me.
I appreciated her telling her story as well. My question is for LaShonda. I'm just wondering if you were able to apply 5 years ago, was there no notification for you to make any application?
Nobody told me anything. I did this research on my own when I was looking at the amendment to the bill, and I was on there on the TBI looking for how do I request to come off. And then that's when I've seen that if you've been on the sex offender registry for 10 years, you can request to come off. I didn't know that till, I'd say a week before I got here, that I could have came off. Well, I could have requested to come off. So I didn't know anything.
My question is for Tiffany. Tiffany, you mentioned that it was really hard to go from being required to be on the sex offender to overnight, just your life really changing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how long it took for it to really sink in that you were off of the registry. I know you mentioned like bringing a letter to your daughter's school. Was there anything else that you had to do and off? Like any other people that you had to help?
No.
How did that work?
No, other than the letter to the school, I went as fast as I could to the DMV because in Tennessee, on our IDs, we've got code 88, which is identification as a sex offender. It's right where they put it. So I ran and got that taken off because that's being stopped. That barcode alone, if I would have went to the school with that ID, that barcode is tied in. So when you go into the school system in Tennessee, you have to scan your ID and it runs you through the sex offender registration. So if you happen to alert, you're automatically in custody at that school. So I immediately had to go get a new ID. So I went and got that done. But no, other than just overnight, I had a few, still, it's hard at playgrounds. I'm just praying that not too many moms float my way. Try to just kind of get in and out and stay as private.
Just so you know that's normal.
Well, good. But, you know, planning our first camping trip, going to a KOA campground, that was surreal. And this is my first time driving out of state. I have flown to conferences, but this is my first time being able to get in a vehicle and just drive out of state without having to do a safety plan, take pictures of my vehicle, text every hour where I'm at. This is the first, I mean, I had to have an app on my phone that monitored my internet, and it sent a read receipt to the officer of everything I was doing online. This is the first time I've been free. I can do whatever. I got a passport. I applied for mine and my daughter's passport and got those. So it's a lot, and just in this past, because December will be 2 full years, and it has sunk in. But I think now I'm going through the stages of what the same with grief, anger, and just what the fuck. Why did you even put me through all that? And my daughter lost so much time, not even to speak on my daughter. I mean, we would drive past playgrounds and she would cry and ask why. And I would have to tell her because we don't have a membership. So I would have to, she was a kid, you can't really tell why, the truth. And it was just, it's been, and so when we pulled up that one day, she just, we got a membership, Mom? And I'm like, yes, baby. So, you know, it's just, you know, those moments is what keeps me not as angry, because at least she's now been able to live and not imprisoned anymore. I can deal with prison. You know, I can deal with that, but it's watching and experiencing what and now going back through the tunnel and seeing how much she lost. That's where I find my freedom and my strength.
Edward, I'm wondering if Washington, you heard Tiffany mention, you know, they would send her internet activity. Do you have any sort of restrictions like that placed upon you in Washington as a result of having to register?
Only while I was on probation. So I was on probation for 3 years. They never had to like look at my internet history or anything like that. But I had to take a lie detector every 3 months. It's like 3 or 6 months, I can't remember. I couldn't go to, like you said, parks. I couldn't go to high schools or schools. If I wanted to watch my brother play, I had to go with like my mom or my dad. What else? Couldn't drink. I couldn't smoke weed. I ended up, because of that, I ended up actually getting addicted to this thing called spice. It's like synthetic weed. It's like fake weed. I ended up smoking that and getting really addicted to that. It come down as like heroin. It's been like 10 years, and I was telling a friend of mine, Mary Ellen, who's actually watching, like I try to forget this stuff just because it kind of, when you think about it so often, it kind of puts you down into a depression. I know that I have stipulations now still
But I try really, really hard not to like bring myself down or think about it, because for my own sake, I tend to kind of get into this ball and won't want to get out. But I like doing this because it's not about me, even though it may be my story, but my story itself is for other people. So I have to think of it that way.
Okay, with no questions on mine, my last question is, Edward, are we going to see you at the next HINAC?
Yes.
Yes.
We've got to get you out here. I feel like you're just, I've never heard your story before either, and that was amazing. So we've got to find a way to get you out here so you can meet all of us.
I know. I was just texting my friend. I was like, "How do I become a public speaker and get paid for this?"
Like, how do I make that happen? You can make that happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just wondering how you all found each other, you know, to be part of this community, to help each other and speaking. Does that sound right?
Well, I can say with Tiffany, I met her through the Elizabeth Taylor Foundation. I met her through there, and Tennessee HIV Modernization Coalition. So I say with a lot of organizations, we intertwine, and that's where we meet everybody.
Yeah, I want to say for me, Sean Strube, he's the reason. Years ago, he was the first one I sent the email to, and it just, the networking, it just kicked off from there, and it just bounces. You bounce off and on from there, and I'm still meeting them. Yeah.
Obviously, I've met both of them through the Tennessee Modernization Coalition. And just like in conversations with them and hearing mention things, I was like, wait, I want to know more. Tell me more. And like, these are the people that inspired me to submit this abstract, right? Like, they're at the forefront of my brain when I'm like, let me type this out. This is important for people to hear. With Edward, I'd love to hear how you got connected. I got connected with Edward by our previous ED is working on another case in Washington, and I just saw his name like mentioned in the notes, and I was like, wait, who's Edward? What's Edward's deal? What's he about? And so we had, for me, a late night conversation where I was able to connect with him. So this is the beginning of Edward and I's relationship together, our working relationship. So we're going to be, still in contact with Ciro, with AIDS Law Project, because we're going to get him off the registry as well. That's one of my goals. So let me turn it over to Edward to say how he got in the mix with this as well.
So Ciro Project was my first public speaking thing back in 2019 when I went to Washington, D.C. And then there's this thing called Through Positive Eyes. I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of that, but UCLA goes to different cities in different countries, and they pick there's an audition for it, but you have to audition to tell your story and take photos and express yourself through these photos and your story to show people how you live with HIV and how you navigate the world. And so I got to do that, and with that also put me back in touch with people back in the Ciro Project back in 2019. So that's kind of how I got involved in this again.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? No. Well, I just want to say thank you again. Thank you for attending. I hope that this inspires people when you go back to your coalitions to bring this up if it's relevant. Thank you, Edward, for speaking. We'll be in touch. You see everybody waving? We appreciate you. All right.
So you just cooking for.
Oh, I did. I didn't mean
That
to.
conversation.
He's got to pour his heart out.
We was about to cry.
We already did that part.
Hey, you was about to cry.
That was amazing.
Yes.